Welcome to Histories and Native Tales, where we uncover the forgotten stories of America's frontier. We invite you to join our growing community of history enthusiasts. Subscribe, share this episode, and help us preserve these remarkable tales for future generations. The winter sun cast long shadows across central Texas on January 23, 1871, as three horsemen made their way westward along a desolate cattle trail from Weatherford. At the front rode Britt Johnson, known simply as Britt to most, his weathered face and straight-backed posture reflecting years of experience in the saddle. His companions, Dennis Curitin and Paint Crawford, followed closely behind, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust from the well-worn path. The trio's destination was Johnson's ranch, where they planned to round up cattle for sale back in Weatherford's bustling market. Each man sat easily in his saddle, displaying the natural grace of seasoned cowboys. Their reputation in the community spoke volumes. They were known not just as skilled cattle handlers, but as fair businessmen whose word could be trusted in any deal. These men shared more than their proficiency with cattle and commerce. All three had emerged from the shadows of slavery less than 10 years prior, their newfound citizenship a product of the nation's tumultuous transformation. Britt Johnson, in particular, had distinguished himself in the eyes of both settlers and natives as a man of unwavering integrity. His story had begun to take shape in the summer of 1864, when, still legally bound as a slave, he received orders from his master to journey to Parker County for ranch supplies. This seemingly routine assignment would set in motion events that would forever mark his place in Texas history. Before departing for Parker County, Johnson had made what he believed to be a prudent decision. He entrusted his wife and children to the care of the Fitzpatrick family, their neighbors who lived in the small settlement nearby. The area had long endured raids from Comanche and Kiowa warriors, but the settlement's residents had developed a wary vigilance that had kept them safe thus far. Johnson's trust in this arrangement would prove devastatingly misplaced. Upon his return from Parker County, Johnson found his world shattered. The settlement lay in ruins, with burned-out buildings and scattered possessions, marking where homes had once stood. The devastating news struck him like a physical blow. His young son, Jim, had been killed, along with several members of the Fitzpatrick family. The Comanche and Kiowa raiders had taken the remaining survivors, including Johnson's wife and other children, deep into the frontier. Determined to rescue his family, Johnson took immediate action. He secured a rare and crucial document from his master, written permission to travel alone through the frontier territories, a legal requirement for any enslaved person at that time. This paper in hand, Johnson embarked on a solitary quest that would test the limits of his courage and cunning. For months, he tracked the raiders' movements across the harsh terrain, gradually establishing connections with various tribal members. His approach was methodical and diplomatic, earning him enough trust to begin negotiations for the captives' release. Johnson's persistence paid off in what would later be recorded in history as the Elm Creek Raid aftermath. Through careful negotiation and trade, he secured the release of not only his own family members, but all surviving captives from the settlement. However, his success carried a price. Some tribal members accused Johnson of duplicity, claiming he had taken more captives than the agreed-upon terms allowed. This perception of betrayal would cast a long shadow over his future relations with both the Kiowa and Comanche tribes. The bitter memory of Johnson's rescue mission lingered among the Kiowa and Comanche warriors. Their whispered vows of vengeance had circulated through the tribes for 7 years, passed from warrior to warrior like a smoldering ember waiting to ignite. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Johnson signaled his companions to halt. His massive horse, a battle-tested companion that had carried him through his desperate search for his family years before, responded instantly to his touch. As Johnson dismounted, his small dog burst into motion, darting between the horse's legs with unbridled joy. The animal's excited whimpers and frantically wagging tail created a moment of warmth in the gathering dusk. This scene of companionship between man and animals masked the deadly serious nature of their situation. The Texas frontier remained a crucible of conflict, with the powerful Comanche and Kiowa tribes maintaining their fierce resistance against the encroaching settlers. Every patch of open ground between established settlements held the potential for violent confrontation. The three men moved with practiced efficiency as they began setting up their camp. Their actions reflected years of experience not only in handling cattle, but in surviving the harsh realities of frontier warfare. To casual observers, their methodical movements might have appeared routine, even relaxed. Yet their apparent calm belied their vigilance. Each man carried a repeating rifle and multiple revolvers, their weapons loaded and within immediate reach. The ammunition they carried was substantial, a testament to their understanding of the territory's dangers. Their careful preparation spoke volumes about the thin line they walked between peaceful commerce and potential combat. Each man's saddlebags bulged with ammunition, hundreds of rounds carefully distributed among them. As twilight settled over the camp, they noticed the distant flicker of another campfire, where a group of freight-hauling cowhands had made their camp roughly a mile and a half away. The presence of other travelers provided a false sense of security, and after a simple meal of cold provisions, the three men settled into their bedrolls, the vast Texas sky stretching endlessly above them. January 24th dawned bitter and raw, the winter's grip evident in the frost-covered ground and the biting wind that swept across the open country. As the first pale rays of sunlight began to pierce the eastern horizon, Britt Johnson, Dennis Curtin, and Paint Crawford stirred from their sleep. They moved through their morning routine with practiced familiarity, checking their horses and considering the prospect of breakfast. The morning's peaceful rhythm, however, was suddenly and violently shattered. The sound hit them first, a deep, rhythmic thundering that seemed to emerge from the very earth itself. The men's heads snapped up in unison as the sound grew to a deafening roar. Through the morning haze, they witnessed a terrifying sight. 25 Kiowa warriors charging toward their camp at full gallop, their horses' hooves throwing up clouds of frost-covered earth. The warriors, who had been raiding local homesteads, had recognized Johnson and his companions the previous day. Now, adorned in full war regalia, they descended upon the camp like an avalanche, their war cries splitting the dawn air. These were not random raiders. They were warriors with a purpose, come to fulfill a 7-year-old promise of vengeance against Britt Johnson. The Kiowa warriors bore down on the camp with calculated fury, their war cries echoing across the morning air in a terrifying chorus that spoke of both tactical coordination and deeply personal vengeance. Their elaborate war paint and ornate regalia transformed them from mere raiders into living embodiments of their tribe's martial tradition. Each detail of their appearance carrying profound cultural and spiritual significance. Although smaller in number than their Comanche allies, the Kiowa had earned equal respect and fear across the Texas frontier through generations of warfare. Their distinctive cultural identity set them apart from the Comanche, who were known for their austere, practical approach to war dress, though by the 1870s, even this was beginning to evolve. The Kiowa warriors displayed their tribe's rich cultural heritage in every aspect of their appearance, from intricately beaded clothing to ceremonial paint patterns that told stories of previous victories. Their weapons, a mixture of traditional bows and modern firearms, represented the tribe's adaptive approach to warfare, combining ancestral knowledge with new technologies. The attack itself demonstrated the sophisticated military tactics that had made both Kiowa and Comanche warriors legendary across the plains. Instead of the straightforward charge that might have been expected, the warriors executed a complex circular maneuver that Johnson, Curtin, and Crawford recognized from bitter experience. The warriors formed a rotating circle of death around the camp, each rider maintaining perfect spacing from his companions. As the circle spun like a deadly whirlwind, individual warriors would break formation just long enough to fire their weapons, then smoothly rejoin the circle's rotation to reload, maintaining constant pressure on their targets. The effectiveness of this tactic became immediately apparent as bullets and arrows rained into the camp from every direction. The three men found themselves at the center of a perfectly executed ambush, with no natural cover to shield them from the encircling warriors. Their once peaceful campsite transformed into a killing ground as they desperately sought any protection from the relentless barrage. The Kiowa warriors' coordinated movements demonstrated years of practiced horsemanship and tactical precision, their horses responding to the slightest touch as they maintained their deadly formation. The three men responded to the attack with desperate intensity, their rifles cracking in rapid succession as they poured round after round into the swirling mass of Kiowa warriors. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder as their weapons heated from sustained fire. Despite their experienced marksmanship, their exposed position in the open camp left them fatally vulnerable. Cureton fell first, multiple arrows finding their mark in his chest. Crawford managed to empty his rifle one final time before Kiowa bullets struck him down, his body crumpling beside his fallen companion. Johnson, now alone and facing certain death, made an agonizing decision. His faithful horse, his companion through years of trials, stood trembling beside him. With hands that had never failed in their strength, but now shook with emotion, Johnson drew his large bowie knife from its leather scabbard. The steel blade caught the morning light as he hesitated for one precious moment, then struck with swift mercy. The massive horse collapsed heavily to the ground, its final breath escaping in a soft whoosh as its legs folded beneath its bulk. Johnson immediately took position behind his fallen mount's body, using the still warm corpse as a makeshift barricade. His small dog pressed against him, whimpering in confusion and fear as the battle raged around them. From their distant vantage point, the freight-hauling ranch hands stood frozen in horror, watching the unfolding tragedy through the morning haze. Their own survival instinct kept them rooted in place, knowing that any attempt to help would only add their own names to the day's death toll. During a brief lull in the Kiowa's rotating attack, Johnson displayed the cool-headed determination that had marked his entire life. He darted from behind his cover to reach his fallen comrades, retrieving their weapons and remaining ammunition with quick, efficient movements. Returning to his position behind the horse, Johnson established a methodical rhythm of death. He worked his weapons with mechanical precision, each shot carefully aimed and delivered, each reload executed with practiced speed. The steady crack of his rifle punctuated the continuing thunder of the Kiowa charge as Johnson fought on, alone but unbowed, turning his defensive position into a fortress of desperate resistance. Alone behind his dead horse, Britt Johnson fought with the cold precision of a man who had survived the frontier's worst. His wife and children waited in their home just 40 miles away, close enough to hear the gunfire if the wind carried right. 7 years had passed since he'd tracked his kidnapped family through this same territory, bargaining with the very warriors who now sought his death. The memory of finding his murdered son Jim, the months of desperate searching, the delicate negotiations that ended in accusations of treachery, all of it had led to this moment. The reality of frontier combat stripped away any notion of glory. Johnson worked his rifle with mechanical efficiency, the woodstock growing slick with sweat despite the morning chill. Each shot had to count. Each reload had to be perfect. The Kiowa warriors' war cries filled the air as they circled closer, their horses' hooves churning the frost-covered earth into mud. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the copper tang of spilled blood. Johnson's resistance spoke through the bark of his rifle, a staccato rhythm of defiance against the thunder of hoofbeats and whistling arrows. The distance between life and death narrowed with each passing minute. The freight haulers, watching from their camp, could make out individual warriors now as they tightened their deadly circle. Then came the moment, a sudden shift in the pattern of Johnson's fire, a brief stumble in his reload rhythm. Whether arrow or bullet, the fatal strike came swift and sure. The warriors converged on his position like wolves on wounded prey, their horses' flanks heaving with exertion as they closed in for the kill. The freight haulers turned away. They had witnessed enough Texas legends die. The freight haulers approached the battlefield after confirming the Kiowa warriors' departure. Their systematic inspection of the site revealed evidence of a fight unprecedented in its intensity, even by the harsh standards of frontier warfare. Dennis Cureton and Paint Crawford's bodies lay where they had fallen in the initial assault. The warriors had executed their traditional scalping ritual on both men with precision, removing the crown of each man's head. Multiple bullet wounds and arrow impacts on their bodies indicated they had died quickly under the overwhelming firepower of the initial attack. Johnson's defensive position remained clearly marked by his horse's carcass. The animal's body, struck by at least 24 bullets and arrows, had served as an effective barricade. The position of the impacts suggested the Kiowa warriors had maintained their circular assault pattern throughout the battle, firing from multiple angles simultaneously. Behind the horse lay Britt Johnson's body, bearing evidence of systematic mutilation. The warriors had taken particular care to disfigure his face, a deliberate act of vengeance beyond mere combat killing. His dog's body had been forcibly inserted into his torso, a specific message of dominance and retribution from his attackers. The physical evidence around Johnson's position told a precise story of his defense. The freight haulers counted 173 spent cartridge cases scattered in a semicircle behind the horse's body. The brass casings showed signs of being ejected from multiple weapons, confirming Johnson had retrieved and used his fallen companion's firearms. The cartridge distribution pattern indicated he had maintained disciplined fire throughout the battle, targeting specific warriors rather than shooting randomly. The freight haulers dug a common grave beside the road, measuring approximately 6 feet by 8 feet, and buried all 3 men together. A simple marker recorded their names and the date of their deaths. A wooden marker initially marked the burial site of Johnson, Curitin, and Crawford. Today, an official Texas Historical Commission marker stands at the location, documenting the events of January 24, 1871. The marker records not only the battle, but Johnson's earlier achievements in negotiating the release of frontier captives. No formal funeral services were conducted for the men, following the practical necessities of frontier burial practices. The Kiowa warriors retreated to their territories in the open plains following the engagement. Their alliance with the Comanche would continue through the Red River War of 1874-1875. This conflict marked a decisive shift in the balance of power on the southern plains. Both tribes, already weakened by decades of warfare and epidemic diseases, faced increasing military pressure from the United States Army. The war's conclusion fundamentally altered the political and social structure of the southern plains, ending the military dominance of both the Kiowa and Comanche nations. The complete account of the Red River War campaigns, along with the detailed narrative of Britt Johnson's earlier mission to rescue frontier captives, demands its own dedicated examination. We invite you to join us for these upcoming episodes by subscribing to History and Native Tales. Activate notifications to receive alerts about new episodes exploring these critical moments in American frontier history.